Welcome to Deep Dive. I'm your host, Kevin Benedict, and I want to thank you for joining us today. And I'm so excited to be able to introduce Mance Harmon, who's the CEO of a company with the coolest name, Hedera Hashgraph. Thanks for joining us, Mance.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Mance, this is a fascinating topic. We get to jump into distributed ledger technologies and blockchain and all that kind of fun stuff. But before we do that, let me just find out where you're calling in from.
Yeah, actually, I'm calling in from Dallas, Texas. So I'm a Texan, been here for 15 years, and this is our headquarters.
Very good. So tell us about yourself. For those that haven't had the opportunity to meet you before, give us a little bit about your background, Mance.
Sure. Well, so I am a computer scientist. My background is deep tech, going back to the early 90s. My co-founder and I, Lehman Baird, who's my co-founder, we met in 1993 doing research for the Air Force Senior Scientist for Machine Intelligence in the Air Force. We were young officers at the time.
Wow.
And then we both taught computer science at the Air Force Academy. I was a course director for cybersecurity. And then I managed a software program for the Missile Defense Agency. And I don't know if you or your viewers remember the movie War Games from the 1980s with Matthew Broderick.
I've just heard about it.
Yeah. So it's part of the culture. I was responsible for the program that built the real thing, and the government uses to help protect its citizens and allies from incoming ballistic missiles.
Wow.
We decided we wanted to be entrepreneurs, Lehman and I. And so we've started and sold a couple of companies in the space of identity. And here we are now with startup number 3 and doing Hedera Hashgraph.
Wow. So I'm going to just ask this. Did you start out to be an entrepreneur? Was that always in your dreams, dreamscape, or did it just kind of, ended up there?
You know, it's an interesting question. It's one that I have thought about, honestly. I didn't recognize that I was an entrepreneur until my 30s. But, you know, after having enough years behind you, you can sort of be introspective and take a look back. And there were markers along the way. It's early on, very early, as even as a middle schooler, way back when, where I did some crazy things, and now I understand, you know, what was going on, you know, what made me tick way back then. And I do believe it's just part of my DNA for sure.
Well, great. Hey, and before we move on, I want to thank you for your service to our country as well. Our son also served as an officer in the military, and so I have a great appreciation for the sacrifices you make and the work you've done. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a great experience. You know, it's certainly a family, and I enjoyed every minute of it.
No, that's terrific. So when did you first start becoming interested in the whole concept of blockchain and distributed ledger technologies?
Early. So Lehman actually went to work on this problem in 2012, and I took a serious interest beginning in 2013. And it was really from the perspective of identity. I was at the time head of architecture and labs for a mainstream identity company, trying to understand, is there some way that we can use, at the time, Bitcoin, you know, and blockchain as a term sort of emerged from there. But could we use that infrastructure with respect to identity? And at the time, we came to the conclusion that we couldn't. But so it goes way back to 2013 when we first started taking a look, and Lehman solved the problems that he was trying to solve, that being high performance with fantastic security at the same time, simultaneously. and he solved those problems in 2015, and it was a no-brainer. Once we understood what he had created and we saw the value in it, it just, there was no way we could not pursue that technology in the marketplace.
Oh, that's fascinating. So let me ask you this question, though. There are literally hundreds of companies already out there that have various industry solutions, platforms that are trying to be, the unifying platform that everybody kind of agrees to support. And then there's Hedera Hashgraph.
Sure.
So, why now and why Hedera?
Well, it was interesting. When we decided to pursue this, the problems associated with technology were huge. I mean, and they still are. If you look at Bitcoin, for example, it can process 7 transactions per second globally. Ethereum, 15 transactions per second. And it can take tens of minutes, with Ethereum and an hour with Bitcoin to know when those transactions are final or they're not going to change. And they're really expensive in cost per transaction. So the tech side of it, what Leman created in Hashgraph is just amazing. It's the difference between a calculator and a computer. So with Hashgraph, we're able to, when we launch in a beta capacity, we'll be doing 10,000 transactions per second with finality in a few seconds at a cost of a fraction of a penny. And at full scale and optimized, we expect more than 100,000 transactions per second. And so on the tech side, it was just, day and night. And that wasn't true just for Bitcoin. It was true compared to everything else in the market. And so we knew we had something special in the tech, but we also knew the tech's not nearly enough to build a platform that wins in the marketplace. And we recognized the problems, or many of the problems, that were associated with the existing platforms, and they're primarily around governance and stability. And we had a model that we believed would work and would appeal to the mainstream markets. And so we, call it arrogance or temerity, I don't know, but we believe we understood how to do this correctly when nobody else was doing it that way. And so we decided to pursue it.
So Mance, how much of the performance issues and the differences in performance between your platform and the others out there are self-inflicted as a way of discouraging hacking?
Well, so if you look at blockchain, it's designed, believe it or not, to be slow.
Yeah.
The idea is that there's a chain of blocks of transactions, and the miners in the community can compete with one another for the opportunity to submit a new block to be put on top of the chain. Every miner has a local copy of the chain. And sometimes multiple miners will submit blocks at about the same time. And the community has to decide which of those blocks get put on top of the chain and which get discarded or pruned off the chain.
And that slows everything down.
You have to slow it down in order to give the community the time to make that decision. And so the architecture is fundamentally limiting when it comes to blockchain. And there are various flavors of blockchain. In our case, there's no chain. There is a graph, and the nodes in the network, we don't call them miners. They're not mining in the same sense, but the nodes in the network can submit transactions, individual transactions, to the entire network as fast as they want. And the transactions just sort of pile up on top of each other. And through the magic of math, we're able to calculate locally for each miner, or each node rather, the order of those transactions, and all the nodes agree. And so, the architecture here makes all the difference in the world. And for that reason, I think that the days of blockchain are limited. And it's interesting. People ask me, do you think that blockchain will go away? And the answer is, blockchain as a term, maybe not. I mean, if we look at Ethernet, for example, the protocols associated with Ethernet, the protocols that are used today for Ethernet are not the protocols that we used when Ethernet was first introduced and given the name Ethernet. And so, there's a lot of brand value in the word blockchain, but in terms of technology, absolutely, I think that the market will evolve beyond the technology to something else. And the technology that we have, it overcomes and we believe achieves some of the theoretical limits of what can be achieved, both in terms of performance and security.
Thank you for sharing that. So Hedera Hashgraph seems to be quite successful at finding investors that want to back you. So you must have a powerful and compelling, problem that you're solving out there. Talk to us about that.
Well, so we've talked a little bit about the tech, but as important, if not more important, is the business side of the equation. And when you look at what are the obstacles to mainstream adoption of distributed ledger technology, public distributed ledger technology, there are a few. One is stability of the network.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody in the world that's involved in this space understands and assumes that the public networks that are in the market today are very likely going to end up splitting into competing networks with competing cryptocurrencies. And that represents risk to any mainstream business manager considering spending a few $1 million building an application on top of this network.
Right.
And the problem is really pretty simple to understand, but most people don't think about it. Let's consider just for a moment, if I'm building let's say a land registry application running on top of a public network, and that registry has a list of owners of parcels of land and, records that. And that's part of the network. And so if you have 100 miners in the network and the application developer, have software running on computers and smartphones that make changes to this land registry, and let's say 30 of those miners become disgruntled and decide they're going to split off from the main network and create their own new network.
Mm.
When they do that, that land registry gets copied. The state of that registry at a moment in time gets copied and goes with the new network. Now, you still have the same 100 miners, but 30 of them are now over in the new network, and your software is connecting to the same miners, sometimes in the old network, sometimes in the new network, updating both versions of the land registry, and the land registry information diverges and creates chaos for the application developer. So you have to solve that problem fundamentally, and we've done that. We've made a commitment to the market that our platform will never fork. It will be a single, stable platform that enterprises and businesses no longer have to worry about that with respect to us. And we do that through a combination of both technical controls and legal controls. And so that's a big differentiator. And then if you can solve that problem and the tech problems, then what's left is governance. Who is it that is making decisions about the roadmap of this global network? Can I trust them? And to answer that question, to design a solution for that problem, I actually read a book. I literally read a book by a guy named D. Hawk. And D is the founder of the Visa network back in the 60s, back when it was Bank Americard, before it was Visa.
Yes.
He wrote a book about his experiences and the governance model that he ended up using to bootstrap Visa. And we took the principles from that book and applied it here in our context. And what it looks like is a global council that is designed to be the most decentralized representative council of the entire global market as we get. And specifically, it's 39 global blue chip organizations. These are multinational organizations or global organizations with some of the largest market caps in the world and best brands by trust, brand trust. And so it's not a bunch of banks, for example, or financial institutions. In fact, there are 39 slots in 18 sectors of the market we want representation from, which means there are going to be 2, maybe 3 banks, and that's it.
Yes.
But, 18 sectors, globally distributed, and then finally, term limited. They can't be members forever. They can serve up to 2 3-year terms for a max of 6 years. And these organizations are actually owners of the network. It's an LLC, Delaware-based LLC, and each governing council member is a member of the LLC. So it's not just a marketing relationship, real. And we've had our first 2 council meetings now. We announced the first 5 council members back in February when we had our first meeting in Seoul, Korea. That was Nomura, major financial organization out of Tokyo, Deutsche Telekom, of course, the largest telco in Europe, Swisscom, blockchain, the blockchain arm of Swisscom, another major telco in Europe, DLA Piper, one of the largest global law firms, and Magazine Luiza, which is one of the leading online retailers in Latin America, based in Brazil. And just last week, we had our second council meeting, and the council has grown from 5 to 10, and we'll be making the announcement of the next 5 shortly. We will scale this to 39. And so that's the answer. The answer is to just be honest about the fact that every public platform has some form of governing council. Maybe they don't call it that. Maybe it's a dozen core developers that are making decisions. Maybe it's a foundation or a company, but somebody is making decisions about what ultimately goes into the code base. Even if a platform says we have 1,000 developers, the reality is that a few developers decide what goes into the code base. And so we just acknowledge that fact and say, okay, how can we optimize to be the most decentralized on the planet when it comes to public networks and trustworthy? And this, we believe, appeals, again, to the mainstream. And so we were trying to solve those 2 sets of problems: tech problems in terms of performance and security, and at the same time, the business problems that provide the market trust and stability and certainty that mainstream markets care about. And that is Hedera Hashgraph.
So when you sit down and you're talking to your investors, as you've done over time, what is the real business opportunity that you're presenting them so they see a worthwhile investment?
Well, so to be clear, we're not soliciting any more investment. We raised money last year, and then we stopped raising money in August at the same time that we launched the mainnet, and then we created 50 billion tokens. And so that was the end point. We
got it.
Right. But the vision that we have here is to create a global network that is targeted for the mainstream and does solve both the soft problems and the hard problems and can scale. And, it makes it possible for all the excitement and vision that existed back when Bitcoin was first coming to market and Ethereum was very first being launched, about a global computer or a global resource that makes it possible to create a new level of trust, a new layer of trust, or maybe the trust layer of the internet. But it makes it possible to actually realize it by solving those fundamental problems, where the earlier projects they demonstrated that this is possible at all, and and they have their own focus areas. But our focus was to address mainstream concerns and make it possible for enterprises and businesses, as well as the startup community, to have a platform that will actually work at scale, and it makes it possible for the developer community to realize their visions. And that's it. It's really very simple. There's nothing magic about it. I mean, Hashgraph, it looks like it's magic. It's like black magic until you understand it. Mm-hmm. But it's just math, and it solves the problems. And we believe the governance and our approach to stability on the network, solve the other problems as well.
So what are the big challenges still in front of you, Mance?
If I had a magic wand, the one thing that I would fix, if you want to use that term, is the regulatory environment. When you think about all the problems that you could consider, whether it's the marketing noise or technology or whatever, those pale in comparison to this regulatory environment. The uncertainty in the regulatory environment is one of the biggest hindrances to mainstream adoption of this technology. And I think that when that uncertainty is removed and the game rules are made clear, when we have clarity, it's just going to unlock a tidal wave of innovation and entrance and money, frankly, into the market that is, what drives a market forward. And that's the biggest frustration. We of course we have a model for how to go from a startup where you are raising money in a SAFT instrument. That's what we use, a simple agreement for future tokens. And then at a moment in time, you stop raising that money. And then in our case, what we think of is we stepped onto a bridge. And there's this bridge that you have to cross to get from a security instrument to issuing tokens to those that have invested. And then they can take those tokens and sell them, and those that want them can buy them and use them for the function of the network, for their intended purpose. And those tokens not be securities, right? They're utility tokens or whatever it is. It's a non-security.
Got it.
And there are a series of actions or activities that need to occur while on that bridge. But of course, we've been in conversations now for more than a year with the regulators globally, but primarily in the United States. And that lack of clarity is understandable on the one hand. From the regulators' perspective, they're honestly trying to figure this out. But at the same time, it's quicksand. It feels like the entire industry is just trudging through quicksand because of the uncertainty. So I think that more than anything else is a drag on the market at large.
Got it. So yesterday I was reading an article, Mance, that's in the author said the federal government runs about 25 years behind on their technology platforms if you look across the board. So how technology is always going to be way out front of where regulation happens. So how do you navigate the uncertainty today?
Well, honestly, I think that the truth of it is that you have to be talking to the regulators.
Yeah.
When we were first starting, there were a lot of people that said, Mance, you should not be domiciled in the United States. You should, anywhere else, and don't raise money in the United States. That's not a good answer, in my opinion, right? Because the federal government, U.S. federal government, has a really long arm, number one. And two, that's not the way you want to do business if you are trying to build a company that's going to last for 100 years. And so the answer is that you have to be very transparent with what you are doing, what you intend to do, and tell the regulators, here's the game plan. And if there's any part of this game plan that you don't like, please let us know so that we can adjust.
Yes.
And that's the approach that we've taken. And so, it's my goal that the regulators are never surprised by us. And, we're good actors, and what they care about are preventing the bad actors.
Yes.
And so that's the best that you can do. You can check all the boxes that make sense to check where it's possible. In some cases, it's simply just not possible. Because the technology and the existing rules are incompatible fundamentally. And so, and the regulators understand this as well, right? And so you make a good faith effort, you try to partner with them, be transparent, and the hope and expectation is that, they will respond in the same manner. If there's something they don't like, then they'll let us know and give us an opportunity to cure. That's the approach.
Got it. So, Mance, I've spent much of my career working for various Silicon Valley technology companies, many of which have exit plans from day one, where they're looking to, to be a 3-year company and then they're acquired, or they a 5-year plan to be IPO, all these different kinds of things. Now, I've heard you quoted in the past, and you mentioned today that what you're really striving for is that 100-year company.
Yeah.
How is a 100-year company plan different from one of the typical Silicon Valley build it and sell it?
In our case, it's quite different in a lot of ways. When you look at the governance council, it's structured so that the governing members themselves are not financially incentivized to participate. And what I mean by that is it's an LLC. And in some ways it looks and has the protections of an LLC, but in some ways it's more like a foundation. So for example, there are no dividends that are paid out to the members of the network. And if it were sold, if Hedera somehow were sold, then there's no terminal value. The way that we've structured it is the profits would not go to the members. They go to charity or something. And so from the beginning, we have created this structure to create a governance model where the governing council members have the appropriate incentives to be stewards of this public network, not owners for profit in the same way that normal owners might view themselves. So the corporate structure is designed to last forever, to not provide incentives to be acquired, for example, or sold in the future. So that's one decision. But then, well, look, there are a lot of decisions that flow from a lot of decisions when you think about, am I trying to get out in 3 or 5 years? Then the choices you make are very different, not just with respect to the corporate governance, but with respect to our own incentives, right? Mine and Lehman's personal incentives. So of course we have tokens from the network, but we've made the decision that 76% of our token allocation personally is pushed out past year 5. And so we view this as a long-term play for us as individuals as well. It manifests itself in every part of the business. We're not trying to go to market too quickly. Of course, we want the product in the market, and we do expect that the network will go live this summer. But at the same time, we're going to make sure that we've checked all the legal regulatory boxes that we can check.
Yes.
So that, we don't get shut down or, something. So it's a matter of patience and understanding that this is a marathon and not a sprint. In some ways, it certainly feels like a sprint. We're moving as fast as we can. And
Yes.
It's all a blur. But it really is a marathon, and it really is a goal to provide an infrastructure that's going to be around for generations. And that's important to me and Lehman. I think it's important to the entire team.
Yes.
It's a legacy. It's a legacy to the next generation, and we want to leave that for the next generation. The internet, we'd like to leave the internet. This sounds grandiose, but we'd like to leave the internet in a much better place than where we found it. And if that's the goal, then that affects every part of the business.
Well, those motivations and aspirations and strategies are very refreshing and inspirational to me. So thank you for sharing that. Where do you see the industry going over the next 5 years? How do you anticipate it's going to evolve?
Sure. Well, I do think there will be regulatory clarity. I'm not exactly sure how soon it will come, but it will come. And when it comes, then that will open up the market in a big way in terms of funding and money that flows in. So I certainly do believe that. In terms of technology, I think the tech stack itself is going to become more differentiated. And what I mean by that is if you think about Bitcoin, the software associated with Bitcoin, and it's really just this monolithic thing that's Bitcoin with blockchain, that enables it. What we're doing, and what others will and are doing as well, is we're creating a consensus layer at the bottom that just handles communications and transaction ordering. And on top of that, you put services like cryptocurrency, like smart contracts, like file storage. And then I think that on top of that layer will be another layer of higher level services that makes it even easier for developers to realize their vision for new business models or new types of organizations or companies. And at each layer, within these layers, there will be differentiation, and there will be companies that focus entirely on each one of these parts, right? Mm-hmm. There can be a company that's focused entirely on a fantastic smart contract engine, and the market will adopt in some degree these best of breed components to the technology stack. This is the way that technology markets evolve and mature over time, and we're now beginning to see that, and we're helping to lead that with Hedera. And so we will see the market grow up, as it were, and as a result, the full tech stack that enables this trust layer of the internet will mature and become differentiated and make it possible for the developer community at large to realize their vision and to build the next generation of products and services on the trust layer of the internet.
Mance, I want to thank you so much for kind of pulling back the curtains on a fascinating area of development and just strategy. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.